Today, I'm going to give you a very quick lecture on history, and on that level, history will be touching on um, the reasons for the First World War, Post World War, and then Second World War. So the reasons for the First World War are kind of all over the place. So at this time, Europe and the developed or sort of developing world at that time was scrambling for African territories. I suppose it's called the scramble for Africa or imperialism. I'm not so sure if any Asian territories were also part of the scramble, but from what we were taught, it was the scramble for Africa where they were coming to take over, to colonize African states and then bring in settlers. So there were so many reasons as to why they wanted to scramble for Africa. This is now African history. So I'll leave that for now. We'll talk about that when we talk about African history. So now we are talking about European history. So we basically divide history into European history and African history. I am not so sure why we don't categorize Asian history, but we do study Asia, um, especially China and some of the detectors that were there. But we did that. We're not examined for that. I think I'm not sure. Anyway, moving on. So the reason why World War One came to be is sort of divided into long term and short term, where the short term is obviously the assassination of the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand um, by an anonymous, rumored to be Serbian um, gunman. That was the immediate cause where things got out of hand, and then declaring war ended up into the whole of Europe and slaves from Africa fighting each other, and then the United States and Britain also being involved. So it was really a continental thing. But then, because these are the so-called developed countries or main players, it's called the World War, but it wasn't a world war. It was a continental war, intercontinental war involving Europe and America and Britain. But I mean, it should be renamed something else. I mean, some historians would want to argue that it's a world war in as far as it affected other places, but it did not affect everyone. It did not affect Asia or Africa. Of course, at this time, there was no global village, so there's no justification, in my view, for calling it a world war. That's an exaggeration. Anyway, we digress. So the scramble for Africa had so many clashes between these um, major players, right? Because they wanted the best territories, and then they would fight over who has the ownership. Um, Case study would be the first and second Moroccan crisis, which we actually studied. But Morocco is not the only time major powers fought over territories. So you'd find that this had a growing concern, but it's tied to the situation and climate at the time, which is the alliance system, where the countries were divided into two major groups or camps. It started with the Triple Alliance and Triple Entente system, where Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy came together and became alliances, sort of like you scratch my back, I scratch your back. If anyone tries to mess with you, I jump in. Anyone tries to mess with me, you jump in, kind of the underdog thing. And this was the alliance, Triple Alliance. As a response, we have joining together Russia, France, and Britain, and sort of countering this threat. So these three against one Britain or one France or one Russia, that would have been easy for them. But then if these people come together as well, then it gets sketchy. So remember we talked about problems. We had the Balkan states. So remember now we have the Czech Republic and Slovakia, but back then it was called Czechoslovakia, and we had so many of that. And these were people grouped together but feeling different, like they wanted to be independent. They felt like they did not belong to one government or one system, they were different. So we have the Balkan issue or nationalism, and this was a situation where people felt like they needed self-governance. They needed, okay, we are coming from a situation or era where there were empires, and the downfall of empires had unfortunate consequences where people were grouped together into sort of independent nations, but were not really independent. So that is another issue that was going on. And we have Serbia and Herzegovina. Serbia being more closely, it is more Russian. It's associated with, I mean, Russia was its biggest ally, and they were kind of, sort of similar, I suppose, in traditions, beliefs, and other things anyway. So Serbia and Herzegovina were other points of clash where nationalism was kind of a big thing. And then we have Austria-Hungary, which is now divided into Austria and Hungary. So we have a lot of these conflicts and a lot of this climate, and then we have the continent itself divided into two. So any simple problem just blew out of proportion because of this, and it didn't need to be associated with one party. So when the Archduke eventually met his creator at the hands of an assassin, there were problems getting to a resolve to this issue, and so one party decided to declare war on the other, and so Austria declared war on Serbia, and then Russia backed Serbia and declared war, and then Germany jumped in, and then boom, we have the World War. Now, this also have ripple impacts and influences towards what would happen in the domestics of the business, right? Anyway, so World War One begins, and then the cost of World War One is boring. We kind of studied it, but I'm going to skip it because it's not really something topical for us. We can survive without studying it, but we need to study the downfall, the end. So there was the infamous Schlieffen Plan, where Germany became overzealous and decided to attack and have wars on two ends, and this was called the Schlieffen Plan, and they were invading France and Belgium at the same time. So they were having war into France, and their military was divided in two, and they were over extended. Then we have a new power coming into the war, which is the United States, coming in, and lo and behold, Germany and its alliances lose. So we have Turkey coming in, and Turkey was now okay. The Ottoman Empire had just become so sick, and then you find that most of Germany's allies were sort of struggling, so they were not so strong as opposed to these strong people coming together and becoming even stronger. Germany allied itself with useless allies. Okay, I can't find a better, nicer way of saying it. So anyway, so it was disadvantaged from the get-go. So this is World War I. So we found the reason for the downfall. The war went on for long. Germany was ever overextended, and then it decided to fight war on both ends, and then its allies were very, very weak. And you can build on other reasons for why Germany lost, or why the alliance lost. And this brings us into the post-war period, where the famous or infamous Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler rise to power and then terrorize Europe and the intercontinental dialogue, leading to what they also term Second World War, which I still say was not a freaking world war. It was an intercontinental conflict. So we have this ambitious foreign-born guy born in Hungary who loses his parents, and he struggles on the streets without anyone to care for him or wanting to care for him. And he crosses the border into Germany and rises to power, where the Weimar Republic. Okay, so what I forgot to mention, which is very, very important, is at the end of the war and after defeating, Germany had to sign a Versailles Treaty. So a series of treaties have been signed over history. And even in the scramble for Africa, there were so many meetings, and we have the Berlin Conference, where Germany invited these powers and sort of tried to negotiate towards how to. So weird saying it, but how to colonize Africa in a more dignified manner, where these parties don't have to fight each other. And they wrote treaties to that effect. Anyway, the Versailles Treaty was a declaration where the Germans conceded to failure and were supposed to pay reparations. And after war, the economic climate was just terrible. So this is always a ripe time for dictators to take advantage. And Hitler was one of the most flamboyant orators of the time. And when we say an orator, we mean someone who can persuade you with sweet nothings and say nothing at all or lie, but make you convince you in ways that surprise you. So he was a good person when it came to swaying the masses, when it came to making people thoughtless and do stupid things. So it comes in with the Weimar Republic. Weimar spelled Weimar, where W is pronounced as V. Anyway, that was interesting when we were taught, so I was like, I have to tell you this. Anyway, digressing. So the Weimar Republic was struggling to keep Germany together. So this young fellow was causing all sorts of problems, so they put him in jail. And in jail, he wrote the famous Mein Kampf, which is my story or my struggle, And this book was landmark because it sort of gave a sense of what he thought he had to offer and how he was going to offer it, and sort of laid the groundwork for him rising into power. He joined the major opposition power. He was good at telling the government what they were doing so wrong and gaining the support of the masses. And this helped to lead to his success and eventual taking over of power. Now, in Italy, we have Benito Mussolini coming into power. There's nothing much to talk about. This is a person coming into power democratically. And then 3 years after he came into power, 1925, he says, to hell with democracy, and becomes a dictator. Now, what I want you to do is be able to distinguish Mussolini and Hitler, which is a good strategy because you don't have to learn these things twice. Now, Hitler had the Nazi Party, Nazi, and Mussolini had the Fascist Party. So Hitler is associated with Nazism, Mussolini is associated with fascism, and Hitler is in Germany, Mussolini is in Italy. But you will notice that every dictator, even when we are going to study dictators in Africa, they all use force, they all use intimidation, they extremely rely on the army or military to enforce fear, and they also use oratorship or public, not all of them lie, but publicly speaking to either lies or truths, but meant to sway or influence the people. So you also notice that they rely on nepotism, which is basically surrounding yourself with trust ones, loved ones, family, and these are strategies that Mussolini used, these are strategies that Hitler used, these are strategies that Mugabe used, these are strategies that Idi Amin used, these are strategies that all dictators, including the famous Napoleon Bonaparte of France, used. So the trick is to know who did what extra. So, for example, Hitler had this weird idea of who was supposed to be in existence, long nose white people, a specific genre of white people. So he had a eugenetics where he wanted to have specific traits of the human genome to survive. He didn't want disabled people, he didn't want Jews, so he had an anti-Semitic bias of view where he killed millions of Jews in Germany, and he would have killed them wherever he was able to colonize. And that was okay until I studied in America for a short while. We called it, as I said, but in America they call it the Holocaust. I'm not sure why, but yeah. So when they talked about the Holocaust, I was like, "What are you talking about?" And then when they said, "Oh, it's Hitler," like they were so interested about telling me. I was like, "Oh, I know that. We just didn't call it the Holocaust." So whenever you hear about the Holocaust, it is Hitler killing the Jews. So what else did Hitler do? Hitler was a soldier in the First World War, and he was not happy about the conceding of Germany, and he took Germany to war in the Second World War. Now, the Second World War is more complicated with alliances with Japan. This is Asia, by the way, and we have now nuclear weapons coming into play, which just takes everything to another level, where the Second World War ends with the bombing of Hiroshima and General Nagasaki, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where General Hiroshima famously says that Japan has never suffered such a terrible loss, and it concedes. But this terrible thing has led to people being born with, from it has followed generations and generations, which is just, oh my god. Anyway, this is just getting emotional. Anyway, so I will just leave it at that. If you have followed me closely, you will be able to. This is basically the syllabus. This is basically all you have to know and go into the exam and just write it and pass it. But I don't know why we took a year to study what I've just said in less than an hour. But this is precisely my point. Okay. We might study World War II if you want, but it's not necessary. We'll study African history in the next one, and we'll study some Asian detectors, and then we'll move on to advanced level history, where we will study Otto von Bismarck of Germany. We'll study the Bourbon monarchy and the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. Thank you for watching.